Good day, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for the webinar, How a Woman Can Negotiate to Get What She Wants from Her Personal and Professional Life. I would love to introduce our presenter for today, Cait Clarke. Cait is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the National Legal Aid and Defender Association in Washington, D.C. She served as the Director of Federal Programs at Equal Justice Works. Cait has been a legal educator with 25 years of experience teaching law, training, and consulting on the law and leadership skills. She served as the principal and the legal education specialist with Watershed Associates at Washington, D.C., and she's also the co-author of Dare to Ask, the Woman's Guidebook to Successful Negotiating. She was the founding director of the National Defender Leadership Institute at the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. Cait holds degrees from Georgetown University, Catholic University, and Villanova University School of Business, as well as a doctoral degree from Harvard. And one more thing that I forgot to mention is that you can type in questions in the chat box during the entire presentation because we will be having a Q&A session at the very end. So please keep them coming. We'll make sure to answer as much as we can. Cait, you may speak now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cait Clarke, and I want to say thank you to Ivy Exec. I'm thrilled that they are offering this webinar and helping women increase their natural negotiation skills. So I just wanted to have a few, I guess you would say, ground rules or disclaimers before we go through, I hope, what is a very useful presentation for those of you who are negotiating and negotiating all the time, whether it be at work or at home or at play. The first is that this is really an overview, and what I like to call it is almost a flyover. We're going to touch down on a few critical points and highlight some of the basic points that are already included in the book and our website, which you'll see later in the presentation. But what's helpful, I think, is to know that these are based on research. I like to describe the work on women and negotiating and all the pieces that are coming out on negotiation skills, as well as the need for negotiations or improved skills, because by comparing it to what happened in the medical field. Lots of work was done on the study of the heart and other things in our bodies, and what happened was that there was a realization that we were studying men's bodies and not women's, and we operate differently. And so, like negotiations, there was lots of work being done on, and it wasn't until the past, I would say, decade and a half or more, when we saw some research coming out of many esteemed institutions and other friends of mine like Hannah Bowles and others at Harvard and MIT, and the books have said, look, let's look carefully at women. So our book is really just based on that research, and we've really tried to boil it down. I used to live in New Orleans, so I like to describe it as a roux. We boil it down to the essence, and we really do have some generalizations in there, but we want them to be useful because we know that adult learning techniques require that you have interactive conversations, you apply the skills, and you go back and do it again and again. And so the generalizations are about women, and there are generalizations about negotiation situations. So everyone is different, every situation is different. But let's take a look as we move through this negotiation skills session by thinking about your best negotiation experience. And I want everyone to sit back. If you can, close your eyes. I'm not sure if you're sitting at your office desk or you're caring for your children, but try to take a moment to reflect on your best experience. And that's what we want to build on. So those of you who have done appreciative inquiry and asset-based thinking, that's the place we're starting in, because we know that women are actually negotiating every moment of the day, just like men are. You negotiate when you come through a stop sign. You negotiate as to who's going to go first, right? Sometimes when you get on an airplane, when there's somebody in your seat, you negotiate there. You also negotiate for jobs, and you negotiate for your career. So we want to note that those skills apply across the board. So let's take a moment. When you think of your best negotiating self, how would you rate yourself as a negotiator?
And here are the results. We have 0% highly skillful, 17% professionally competent, 50% room for improvement, 22% adequate, and 11% barely competent.
So thank you for taking that poll, and of course what we note is that in different negotiation situations you might be a more skillful negotiator, and in others you may feel that you're barely competent. One note here is that I am going to use stories because we are on a webinar. Usually this is a day-long training or several hours, and we tell everybody share stories. So I'm not a narcissist here. I'm just going to use examples from my life so that we can make the examples and the skill sets a little more real. But one of the things that I would say is that I'm a better negotiator when I'm negotiating for somebody else. So I was trained as a trial lawyer, and I do indigent defense work, public defense, as well as work on legal aid issues. And so if I have, for example, a veteran in front of me, we're doing lots of veterans work, and I'm negotiating for benefits or for an expungement of criminal record, I'm a very skilled negotiator. I'm pretty aggressive. I dare to ask. But when it comes to asking for my own pay or perhaps benefits and skills, I'm probably down in that category of adequate or room for improvement. And I've been studying this for a long time. So let's take a look at what happens in sorry, I think I need to go back and have control of the slides. I'm not actually able to do that right now. Little technical difficulty. Okay, so the ultimate takeaway from this whole session, if you are here for even a half an hour or the full hour, dare to ask. Play, play, play. Try to ask and negotiate for yourself and for others, and that's what you're going to see, lots of improvements. We are natural negotiators. Women are very, very skilled when they feel competent. Some of the best negotiators I've seen in criminal defense cases and business situations, because I've worked in many different types of business situations as well as government negotiations, that women are actually natural negotiators when they feel that they have the skill set, the competence, and the knowledge in order to move that negotiation along. But when we're negotiating for ourselves, there are some challenges that happen, for example, when the glass ceiling hits. We often, when we don't negotiate, we receive more work, less credit, fewer opportunities. We don't ask perhaps for mentors, and I like the book. I would recommend The Loudest Duck, that actually doesn't talk about mentoring. It says we need to sponsor women, and we also have restricted advancement. And there's studies to prove this, right? So let me just go over a few of them. This is, again, a flyover. On average, compared to men, white women do make 77 cents on the dollar. Yes, we're trying to improve that, and we have laws and other efforts to improve the dollar impact. But really think about that, 77 cents on the dollar, and think about the work that you do. Is it comparable to 70 cents on the dollar, or is it $1.77 is what I argue. African American women make 69 cents on the dollar. This is a study that just came out, as you all have seen, that it was perhaps in the New York Times, you saw it. And Latino women make 57 cents on the dollar. We have to change this. This is a mission, a passion of mine, and so that's why we wrote Dare to Ask, because we think we can make that equivalent. Here's the study out of Carnegie Mellon, just to highlight a few of them. A Women MBAs focus group, and you can see I'm not going to read, oops, apologies for that typo, salaries of 7.6% lower on average than men, and the bonuses were 19% smaller. Now, by not negotiating your salary, I always say to young women and even older women who are very successful, I said, think about over a lifetime. If you're not negotiating your salary, you can lose more than $500,000 by age 60 because of compounding. For those who know that saving is important and retirement accounts, that impacts our lives and we live longer. So that has a very lasting impact. Here's another example. 15% of directorships of Fortune 500 companies, right? Look at that. 10% of those companies have no women directors. That's also true in certain fields. So let me give an example. I've worked with women journalists, and it's quite important to see the $15,000 less than their male counterparts, and managing editors can make $5,000 more. These are recent studies. another example is Susan Reed, The Value of Women Journalists, and she was a Neiman, and the pay gap has not really changed much. That's 90% of what reporters and editors earn. Now remember, this book is entitled Dare to Ask. Think about this. These are women journalists who are some of the best questioners, best interrogators, investigative reporters. When it comes to negotiating or asking and really pursuing this, we've got to improve the way that we ask for what we need and want, and that's what we're doing today. So compounding over a lifetime, male reporters will earn $44,000 more. Why don't we negotiate for ourselves or for in certain situations? Why don't we negotiate? Some of the answers lie in the fact that we are socialized to avoid conflict. So especially if it's about our own interests. I'm again going to reference my cultural background. Some cultural backgrounds, again as a generalization, are very good at teaching negotiation skills, and it comes very naturally. I have an Irish background and large family, and the youngest daughter who was taught to be a good girl. Children are better seen than heard was often a statement I would hear by my mother. So meaning she taught us how to be effective when it was time and we were negotiating for others, but it was a culture that you are trying to avoid conflict. That may play out well in certain situations, but when it comes to negotiations, we've really got to think about how to frame the conversation and how to empower us to be more effective at asking for what we need and want. Women also don't negotiate effectively because sometimes they don't ask because they intuitively think, or they think the other side intuitively knows what they want. I have a colleague who runs a headhunters firm, and she and also for hiring top executives to step into corporations that need temporary help, and these are very skilled individuals with lots of degrees. And when they come into the negotiation, she'll be on the phone, and she'll say to them, I've got a vice president's position that needs to be filled for a year. Can you come in, or can you come in for an hourly rate even? And she said the men typically will say $300 an hour. And she said the women will typically say, well, I have a sliding scale, and I can, well, if it's a nonprofit, I'll go at this rate, but if you really want me, I typically ask for this rate. And so they're sort of this sliding scale syndrome, and one of the things that she advises women to do is to actually put their rate out there when they're negotiating and then put the mute button on on the phone so that they don't actually start to backpedal. I think that's actually a great idea in any negotiation. I've done that myself where I have put a figure out there. You know, if I'm on the phone, I typically, by the way, encourage non-phone negotiations. You should be in person. But if you have to, hit the mute button, put the number out there, and let the silence speak, because a lot of times people get uncomfortable with silence and they'll start to negotiate, and you'll be surprised at some of the results. Speaking to which, women don't know the rules of engagement, and in fact I want you to think about this. There actually are no rules of engagement. You will, in certain situations, yes, that was a generalization, have rules of engagement. For example, people say to me when I teach in the federal government, look, we have pay scales and there are set scales. But I said, but there are no rules of engagement for things like telecommuting, shared jobs, where you park, how do you get professional development. There are lots of things that you can negotiate for. So here's the different rule of engagement that I want you to think about. Women are more effective and creative when they can change the conversation in a negotiation from a win-lose into a conversation. So what do I mean by that? Typically when you hear negotiations and you saw that poll, people will say, oh, it's a negotiation. Well, when I buy a car, or if I bought a condo, or just negotiating for a job, pay scale increase, I see it as a win-lose. I either get that car or I don't, or I have to ask and I'm nervous about it. So if you actually can, like they say in life, the visualization, the best athletes visualize where that tennis ball is going to go, they visualize where that golf ball is going to go, and they practice, practice, practice. And so we're actually very good at conversation. We're very good at engaging, and if we can shift our inner thoughts to seeing this less as a win-lose into a conversation, we can be more effective, because it is a collaborative conversation that we're going to try to achieve in this book. And that's what we talk about in the book. Big idea number one is reframing the process. How many of you have gone into a negotiation, for example, and said, I'm going to ask for this amount of money? But in fact, what you might want to do is go in and say, this is a collaborative conversation that is just starting. Doesn't that sort of make you feel better? I'm going to engage in a conversation that's opening up for new ideas and creativity. We do well in the collaborative sense because we have evolved to facilitate communication. Again, basing some of this on lots of studies. I am not an anthropologist. I do want to note that in the book we talk about this, but there are lots of wonderful books, and I'm more than happy to recommend them, or maybe we can put a list up about the collaborative conversations and how social bonding and emotional sensitivity women are great at. For those of you who know about oxytocin, the way I describe it is that when we can collaborate and when we connect, particularly with other human beings, or we feel some sort of a bond with a person, we release oxytocin. And so if you feel that you're in a collaborative conversation rather than a win-lose, I'm going to dominate and I'm going to be dominated, if you can see the conversation as a place where you will be honored or there's a trusting relationship, oxytocin will release in your brain, and it will actually, we release it when we're in childbirth. We release it when I, for example, may have a bad day, and I'll call up a friend and say, can you meet me for a glass of wine? Already at that point, when we've connected with a friend, oxytocin releases, and it's a very positive feeling. We also, socialization is important. We're good at inclusion, right? You know that the line about it takes a village. So the basics of negotiation, I just want to highlight again the note of doing this in person. We are better if we can connect with on a one-on-one basis. Now, that's not with everybody, right? So some people can be very intimidating. I've been in negotiation situations. I am actually 6 feet tall, and I've been in a negotiation with somebody who was 6'4", former Marine, huge, and he would use his size and his voice to dominate, and that was quite intimidating, and so I learned, well, better to negotiate on the phone or by email. But in person, a lot of things have been happening, and what we're learning, this is one example I like to use, is that we send off, of course, different signals. One study that I use is the tear study that you all may have seen. When you cry, when you cut an onion, the tears, if you took those and put them into a test tube, the tears and put them aside, and then if you were in an argument or in a battle and you cried, you put those tears in another test tube, and if you tested those tears, the chemical makeup is different of each type of tear. One being that when you were in that fight or that traumatic situation and those tears, they actually reduce the testosterone of the person on the other side, which I think is fascinating. Now, here's the lesson. I'm not trying to say cry in negotiations, please. That is not the message here. But the message is that our bodies do send off different signals, and to me that can be an advantage or a disadvantage, right? So what you want to do is think about the process, because I believe that smiling, connecting, engaging, and seeing it as a conversation engages people in different ways, and there are studies, and we'll go into a little bit about that, about the women and how they're perceived. So the most important, before we get into the double bind or triggering gender hostility, I want to just note one very, very important point, that you have to be authentic. The whole message here is that dare to ask and be authentic. So what I mean by authentic is that if you are aligned with your values, your core values, you will send a signal that you are true and that you will follow through with this negotiation or this collaborative conversation. Listening to your inner voice is really important. If you're uncomfortable, then step back. I keep actually a pad of paper sometimes in a negotiation where I just have triggers. They might be some people call it your intuitive voice. Some people just say there's something going on that I need to ask more questions. So I like to call it my intuitive hit list that I keep on a negotiation, because there's something that somebody said that just doesn't ring true or that it doesn't sit well with me. It's important to be authentic because you engender trust. You also can use empathy to build cooperation. So if you're authentic and you're actually really listening to what the other side is saying and sincerely trying to understand where they're coming from, particularly in a hot negotiation, you can build cooperation by actually answering what those other person's authentic concerns are. But if you're trying to act like a man, or you're trying to be somebody else, or you're trying to be humorous and you're not a humorous person, it undermines that trust. So here are a few tactics that I want to talk about to accentuate your advantages. 1, get something back whenever you give something up. Think about that. If you are going into a negotiation, let me back up here, and you step into a negotiation that you've put something out there and you've asked for a lot, you think you've asked for a lot, what happens when the other side says, yes, we'll give that to you? You sort of feel like, oh my gosh, I didn't ask for enough, or why did they say yes? Maybe I really undersold myself, or the person I'm representing, or I went to buy that car, that Prius that I really wanted, and I thought I was really going in for the right price and the right benefits and the services, whatever, and they said yes. Uh-oh, I should have gone on a lower price. So what I talk about is that you should think about all the other benefits that you want. So I'm going to give an example again of my life where I made this was not a great negotiation. I was a Prettyman Fellow at Georgetown. I got an offer to teach at 3 law schools. The one law school I chose was in New Orleans, and I was thrilled to get this job offer to teach law, and I thought I was going to be teaching criminal law and procedure, which was my background in constitutional law. But when I got on the phone with the dean of the law school, I didn't know what salaries were. I was young, and I was in Washington, D.C. I was moving to Louisiana. I had no idea what Louisiana salaries were or what I should be asking for. I started the negotiation. It wasn't a negotiation, frankly. It was, sure, I'll take whatever you're offering. The dean said, we will offer you X amount of dollars. And I said, okay, that's fine. And then he said, well, anything else? And I said, and then I hesitated and said, how about moving fees from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans? And I said, sure, that would be great. And then I said, well, I thought, well, of course I should ask about benefits. I said, what are your benefits? And so he gave the standard university benefits package. And I didn't even think until a year, or many months, actually, I should say, into the process when I was teaching, I didn't think about asking about what courses I would teach. So I was given night courses with 120 students. I was only 28 years old. I walked in and I had 110 students in con law, and I was teaching civil procedure, which was not my field. So I had a huge learning curve. I spent hours learning that course. And I was put on every committee they could possibly think of, because they said, well, you're a single woman moving to New Orleans. You can be on these committees because you don't have a family. So, of course, it was quite an overwhelming situation when I also found out that I didn't negotiate salary, and the men who started with a lower course load, you know, it wasn't their fault. It was that I didn't ask. They had been making a lot more money. And so it was really interesting as I moved up quickly in the school, and I learned I should have asked for a lot more, as well as research assistants during the summer. So the lesson is always make sure that you're in a give and take and asking. Here's the question. Another tactic is in a negotiation, and you're in a collaborative conversation, should you use the word no? So think about that. When you've been in a conversation and you say no, how does that make you feel? Think about when you were even a child, when somebody just turned around quickly and said no. Well, it actually has been shown to shut down conversations. Instead of saying no, we ask you to say something that opens up the conversation. I know you're thinking to yourself, well, sometimes you just have to say no. And that's true. In some situations, in a win-lose negotiation, say no, walk away. You don't want that car. No. You're asking me to pay too much for that house or condo, or I'm not going to pay that for that, you know, whatever item you're buying. Yes, I understand what you're saying, and have you considered, or some other thing, a statement that is essentially a way to continue the conversation. Or you can say no in a nice way by saying, I understand what you're saying, would you consider this offer? And if they say no, then you understand. Ways to say no indirectly can be something like appearing reluctant and hesitant. That, to me, you only use that if you're really authentic. That's true to yourself. You know, being reluctant and hesitant is something that some women do very well, and they use that to draw out time, and time is on our side sometimes in these negotiations, right? The best negotiations last a long time, and then the deals are cut at the very end. Sometimes people are very effective at invoking the higher authority, right? I'm not sure my boss will buy this. Imagine yourself in a situation where, I'm going to go back to the car because it's the simplest, but of course we're also talking about jobs, etc. When you're in a negotiation for work, you may have to go back to your boss and negotiate whether that that deal will go down. When you're buying a car, how many times have you actually negotiated a price and then you'll see the dealer say, well, excuse me, I've got to go back and check it, and I'm not sure that they'll really buy this. Now, he's trying to say no to that offer, but he'll go back and he'll maybe talk to a boss, but maybe he's talking to the vending Coke machine that's there. And then he comes back and says, no, I'm sorry. Well, what we're trying to do with what's happening here is that people are checking in. Sometimes they really are legitimately doing that, which I think is exactly the right thing to do. But it also is a way to say no where you actually can say a concern for others. It doesn't have to be your boss. It could be that you say, I have to check because I'm not sure that's best for my client, or that's not best for our team. Team-based representation is a very good way to say no indirectly, and it also can buy you time to check out whether it actually will hurt the group or the organization or your client. So when we are in a negotiation, another tactic to consider, this is just to consider because it is very important to be aware of triggering gender hostility. I want to go to cite my friend Hannah Riley Bowles, who's at Harvard, and she has done wonderful work for many, many years in this area of gender negotiations. She's at Harvard Center for Public Leadership. And I want you to read this quote and think about how that impacts you. One of the things that I love is when we read this quote in trainings and we talk about Hannah's work, it really evokes a very rich conversation about, well, that's just not who I am. I'm not going to be, you're telling me on one hand to be authentic, and on the other hand, you're telling me I should signal my female status. So what I'm asking you to do is actually think about what is authentic to you to signify collaboration and friendliness, cooperation. The New York Times article that just came out said, you know, women do have they do trigger hostility sometimes when they come in a demanding way. We all know of those situations where a man might be seen as very competent and aggressive, and doing the right thing by the team, and wow, was he not really going strong. Whereas a woman might be interpreted as being nasty or too aggressive or over the top. So what I want you to do is think about making demands in a friendly way. And I emphasize this about being authentic because smiling is doing something in a friendly way. And avoiding projecting dominance from the start. That doesn't mean that through the negotiation you might find an opportunity where you've got the information, you've got to project some dominance, that's okay, but not in the beginning is what I advise. I advise that you try to build that trust, and you need to be conscious of this warmth, kindness, sensitivity. These are the projections, whether you like them or not. This is how women are seen in most situations. So I try to get people to say, look, it's a professional situation. It's not personal, so don't take offense. Remind yourself about what you're trying to do here, and so if it takes being kind and sensitive and trying to project something to achieve your end goal and being authentic, then and we'll talk about this at the question time if you want, then I suggest that we be aware of triggering gender hostility. So here again, we're doing a flyover. I want you to do this. When your next job negotiation starts, remember silly old Cait Clarke sitting in Washington negotiating her first job offer, a big job offer to teach law in New Orleans, and I accepted the first thing that came along, and it really was a very demanding, pressure-filled experience. So don't accept the first job offer, job negotiation. Now listen, that doesn't mean say no, right? Don't use the words no, but put out there some other ideas. So I am often asking people to think about keeping the other side of the table. So when they give that job offer, what you want to do is express what your interests are at succeeding at this corporation, at this federal government or state government or county government job, or starting an NGO or in the nonprofit world. Wherever you are, try not to accept the first job offer, because men typically don't, and they negotiate more effectively, as we saw earlier in this presentation. It's also important because we have an advantage when we keep the other side of the table. If we can keep the other side of the table, the way I do that is to include more than one issue. You heard about the example about a job offer where you want to think about things such as, do you want to have professional training? Who do you want to work with? Is there a team that you want to work with? Are there projects you want to work on? Are there people in the firm that you would like to sit in on their meetings or shadow them? I know some lawyers who say, there's a great mergers and acquisitions lawyer, and I just really want to shadow him. Could I negotiate that at least certain times of my billable hours can be spent on professional development? So always think about your jobs and your negotiations as more than one issue. I'm a big believer that flexibility in my job is important to me, and my good friend Anne-Marie Slaughter has, of course, written a hugely important article that has created a lot of splash on and women and can they have it all? They can't have it all, can they? I hope Anne-Marie knows how much I respect that work that she's done and all the encouragement she's given to women, but I always say to her, it's about asking. It's about daring to ask and teaching the skills, and she agrees that we really need to teach women to be brave and courageous and authentic and ask for more than what they think they deserve. And then patience is the ultimate virtue. That's in the book that I think you all will really note that in many negotiations, I was involved in a negotiation when I worked in a Japanese law firm, and I was a young clerk, and it was a summer program, and I watched these negotiations for a tribal chieftain was negotiating the lease of his island in Micronesia to a Japanese hotel. And the negotiation went on and on and on, and they included, of course, lots of dinners and lots of karaoke nights, etc. And what was amazing was that after several days of this negotiation, it really was wrapped up in about a half an hour at the very end. And as the partner said to me, Clarke-san, it's important to note that it was all about trust. And if you're patient and you build trust, you'll understand what the other party's interests are, and you can really boil it down and you can negotiate it at the very end. So big idea number 3, be prepared. You've heard that over and over again, but what I mean by this is that you yourself have to prepare not only what information is out there about the company or the car you're buying, but you have to prepare yourself. What is it that you really want that's authentic? For me, and I think Anne-Marie noted in her article, you know, having flexible time to meet the demands of your family and the love of your family was a big issue for me. And so my recent job negotiation, I really thought carefully about how to negotiate one day where I would be able to do these type of things and also be with my family and do other creative activities to feed my souls that was more effective in those big 4 days that I came into the office. So here are some ideas on big idea number 3. When I say preparation, it's about preparing for the job and understanding the marketplace, understanding what salaries are, looking online, asking people. Don't just ask people in the firm that you're looking or organization you're looking to join. Do lots of research of other comparable organizations. Then you will control the outcome. So let me do a poll. We're going to pass over here to asking, John. Okay.
Yeah. Here's the poll. Have you ever asked a work colleague what he or she makes, pay, and what their additional benefits and perks package includes? Yes or no? Okay, I have immediate results. Around 80% said no, 20% yes.
Okay. So
This was a quick one.
that was a very quick one. So what I'm going to ask is that it was very interesting when I was working with the women journalists. What they said was that a woman had gone on some boards and had seen pay scales of women journalists, and she said she knew some who had 30 years of experience, very, very well-respected organizations they worked for, and that their benefits package and their pay was much less, but the women didn't know about it. And then she said, I can't tell them, but you know, it's really disgraceful that they are better reporters than some of the men, and their packages are much less. And so I was saying to her, well, what can we do? You know, that's what some lawsuits are built on, right? Being a lawyer that I am. But I also thought, well, why can't we start way back and see if there's a way that we can share information, not only but among women, but in a way that's not confrontational. You know, is there a way that we could ask others? And I've done this, where I've said, could you tell me, a person who has this much experience, what the pay range might be and what packages, what issues you've asked for. I've done that before I've gone into an organization and after I've left an organization, but I've actually not really done it while at work in this current situation. There are ways to do that. There's a website called Get Raised where you can ask for people to help you get a raise. There are other ways to do this. I just want you to think about that, because if you are in a situation where it's a large corporation, we trained at Nokia, for example, and the questions were that they don't share a lot of information. And, of course, some places it's not legal. You know, we don't want to get into the illegalities, but what I do want you to think about is if you know people who are in comparable fields, you may want to ask what the pay ranges are and what other perks they've asked for, like special training. You know, do they get their iPads? Do they get extra telecommuting perks? Things like that. So, Mirjana, I need to get back to the slide control. Okay, almost there. Oh, it's not letting me change slides here.
You can, I believe you can switch it on the keyboard.
Okay. Let's see. There we go. So, here it is. What are the things you need to do? Now, I'm going to fly through this, and I hope that you all will take a look at the book as well as lots of materials that are out there. The program on negotiations at Harvard is great, MIT, lots of negotiation trainings. Ask big. So what I do is I actually, when they talk about back of the envelope, others use, my father literally used to use an envelope when he would negotiate and draw it out. This is just, I put this on a big legal pad. More than one issue, and I list all the issues that I want, and I write dare to ask, because that's my little tip sheet. I need a little encouragement to be brave sometimes and dare to ask. More than one issue, we've talked about that. And then you have to have your dare to walk away, right? If it's a collaborative conversation, conversations continue. So you can have your walking away point. You also have to have your BATNAs. What? A BATNA? What is a BATNA? It is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Here's the question. A BATNA is it's where you have somebody else to deal with, alternative ways to satisfy your needs, or you may wait for another time and opportunity. Quick example, you're going to buy that Prius, and you go in, you have an idea of what you're going to ask for. You're going to dare to ask for a great price and some other services. And maybe, you know, floor mats and whatever detailing and leather seats, you know, ask big. And then you have a BATNA. It may be another hybrid car, but I'm actually asking you to have an idea of what the price of those other cars are, whether they satisfy your needs, and are there alternatives that are beyond just another car? For example, could you do a zip car? Would that satisfy your needs for a year? What's the price comparison? Would you be able to do, you know, cars to go? That's different from the zip cars. So the concept is you're going to be much more powerful if you have alternatives. If you know that you can use zip car for a year, you're going to save that insurance money and all of this, so you're going to go in and negotiate really well because you're going to dare to ask because you know you have other ways to get around. So the three big ideas that we talk about is to reframe the conversation into a conversation. I love the idea of people who have, they say, I have a big negotiation coming up, and I stop them and I say, no, it's not. That's not just one negotiation. They're actually going to go into a conversation. And you kind of see their shoulders relax a little bit more, and they say, yeah, it is a conversation. Now, there may be a time frame, of course, there often is, but you also can control the process. And by controlling the process, you have to have your ducks in a row. You've got to have the information and your BATNAs. You've got to know the alternatives. Here's another example. If you're going in to negotiate for a pay raise or moving into a different department or a whole new strategy in your job, if you have gone out and looked for other jobs and you have other job interviews lined up, you will be in a much better negotiating position, won't you, when you go into your boss and try to argue for a raise if you know you have job interviews? But wait a minute, what if you had a job offer somewhere else? You're even in a better position to negotiate and to ask big. So be prepared, set up the alternatives, and as I said, this is really a flyover. There are lots of little nuances, but about the most important thing is that you ask and that you receive extra training. So this is the firm I worked for. As I said, there are lots of others. I love the work that Watershed Associates does. It's very interactive. It's framed for your organization. They specialize also in cultural negotiations. Wonderful work that they do, and there's their website. So now let's just rate yourself as a collaborative conversationalist. I'm going to pass it back over.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how do you rate yourself as a collaborative conversationalist? Highly skillful, professionally competent, room for improvement, adequate, barely competent. And let's give them a few more seconds to answer. Okay, so here are the results. 15% highly skillful, 50% professionally competent, 30% room for improvement, and 5% adequate. We have 0 for barely competent.
Great. So I actually see improvements already because I think there's a reframing going on here. So what that will, obviously, it's a very quick and dirty poll that we're doing here, but what you can see is that the numbers shifted in terms of your self-appreciation for your skill sets. So if you go into the next collaborative conversation and you realize that you have the skill sets naturally to be an effective negotiator because you know how to engage people, I'm going to ask you to smile a little bit. Show whatever warmth and authentic self that you are. Again, if you're not a humorous person, don't try to tell jokes and be funny. Try to be who you are as best as you can, because sometimes negotiations are very nerve-wracking and a little bit scary when you're actually going in, particularly to negotiate a job that you really, really want, and we're in tough economic times, and you say, oh my gosh, how can I go in and ask big when I know there's 17 other people lined up behind me? Here's the thing. When they get to the point where they make that job offer to you, they've spent a lot of time and resources selecting you for a reason. So don't forget that once they've said yes to you, that they don't want to lose you. Most of the time, unless you ask really way off the charts type of things, and that's not what I'm asking you to do. Be reasonable, be confident, but be really creative so that when you go in to negotiate that job offer or that raise, that you're saying to them, we have a conversation here. I want you and you want me. I've actually said that in negotiations. I've said to people, I think we're close. We really are, we're in a conversation now about how we make these ends meet. And the reason you want to say that is because they want you because they know that you're going to be productive, and you want to be as productive and produce for that organization as best you can. And so you're saying, this is what I need to be that productive. And if it means getting a laptop, an iPad, a cell phone paid for, a team to work with, a research assistant, professional skill building, flex time, and ability to stay home on Fridays, then go and ask for it, because you can tell them that you're going to be more productive. And you're also bringing relationships with you. All of us have fabulous relationships. Ivy Exec is one place where I'm just so impressed with the things they offer to build those connections and those professional connections. Men are great at that. I think we can be even better at that. So the next slide, we're going to, sorry about that sound. I can't get to the next slide.
Believe you can, again, just switch it on the keyboard.
Yep, there we go, sorry. Okay, my apologies. So here are some practice exercises that I want to note. In the book, at the end, we have exercises for you to try. And I'm doing this because I am a teacher by training and by my nature. And it's easy to read a book and then say, oh, yeah, I'll try that. But what we know is that after you hang out from this webinar, you're going to forget a lot of this. And you're actually going to only remember a very small percentage. I hope you remember that you should dare to ask and ask big. You should be your authentic self, and I'm telling you to actually find out what's going to make you feel comfortable in a collaborative conversation. And I hope you practice, because putting actual words down on paper will internalize the skill set, and you will become better and better at what you do. So now what we want to do is take some questions.
Okay, perfect. We have tons of great questions, so I'm just going to start, and you can answer as many as you can, but let me know when you want us to wrap up. The first one is, I've been given a verbal commitment to a promotion in the coming months, but we haven't even talked salary. How and when should I start the conversations about that?
Great question. So I would suggest the following. You should go out and find out what other firms and other corporations or nonprofits are paying for someone like you in the equivalent position with the equivalent experience. But if you can't find that out, then what I would do is identify a mentor in the organization who you could ask a confidential conversation, particularly, is there someone in there, in your organization, who you feel you could trust and have this out-of-the-office conversation that you're so thrilled, you're committed to staying with a firm because they're going to invest in you, right? And so then what you would pose is either a direct question about what salary do you think I should ask for? We haven't raised this question. Or what range does this firm pay? And then once you have that information, you keep that to yourself until you go into the negotiation. And this is my way of doing it, and I would suggest that you look at other materials, but even the most recent New York Times article, I think, was saying too, let them put the first offer on the table in terms of the actual dollar figure. But what you really do want to do is make sure you're putting a lot of other offers on the table. So if you don't want to put that dollar figure out there first, you want them to, but you want to make sure that they know it's not just about money. It's about professional development. It's about work-life balance. It's about all those things that make us happy and productive and creative individuals at work. So make sure it's more than one issue, and you make sure that you have the salary idea in mind. You can even do lots of research on the internet and ask some colleagues. I'm sure there are people in other fields that you know. You don't have to ask what their direct salary is, but you could say, could you give me a range? Are you making X? What is the range in your organization? Empowerment. It's about you going in there and letting them put the number out, but you having lots of other requests. Ask big.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. We have another one. Will it come off as being lazy or not dedicated if you ask for flexible, condensed work schedule, more vacation time, etc., during the offer negotiation?
So there is always the risk of a woman in particular being perceived as demanding and over the top, that this is the backlash concern, the double bind. We know that in my field of law, a lot of women have who are partners in firms and others have really worked huge hours and don't even ask for any flex time. That they now are, thankfully, but it has been a challenge because some of those women who are in positions of power now say, oh, I did it, you can do it too. You're looking weak, or you're not showing up as we want you to show up, which is a team player. And the man wouldn't ask for that flex time. Maybe they would, and I hope they do more now, but here's the thing. I don't think it's lazy. I think it's actually about talking about productivity. There's a very good book called Womenomics, and Womenomics talks about, and you can also get it on tape. I listened to it while driving to work, actually, about the economic value of women and the productivity that that a corporation or a firm or organization sees when women actually come in and do their work intensely. And so it's about storytelling and persuasion. So if you can read that book and look at the research, and it shows that if you give women that flexible time, they're not lazy, they're actually more productive in that condensed work time, because we've got a lot to get done, right? So that's what I do. I come in and I'm like, I've got my to-do list, I sit down, I get my work done, and then I know that I've got to show up at the school event. The science project is due this week, in fact, literally, and I know that I have to buy all that equipment. I've got to get it done on a certain amount of time, and it's best, of course, if I can convince that person that I'm going to be much more productive when I do my work in a 4-day week, or however you want to do it. Let me also add that I think and I will try to find those, maybe after this we can follow up, there are some studies that show about productivity at home. I have mixed views about that, because I am not always, and I'm going to be candid here, I love working at home, and I do work from home often, and with the internet it's great. But I'm not always the most productive. I will spend some time in that kitchen coming and wiping down the counter when I shouldn't be, and I'll eat more, or I'll just see projects that need to be done. I've gotten better at it, because what I do is I actually set a timer, and this is intense time, and then I take a break. So all those efficiency gurus who are on the phone will know you've got to reward yourself. And I also believe there's a lot to be said about working on teams and in offices for productivity. But I'm a believer in telecommuting, and I'm a believer that you should ask for it if you need it, but show that it actually will make you more productive.
Perfect. Thanks so much. This was a great one. We have more. Here's the next question. I recently received an excellent job offer with a package which is higher than market. The problem is that one of my colleagues is also joining, but at more senior level, even though we have the same experience level. How can I negotiate without comparing to my colleague, and should I ask for more given that the offer is already really good?
So it's easy for me to be on the other end of this question and say yes, because that's what we're about. If you believe authentically, deep down inside, you only ask this question because you know that you can and deserve more, I think. I may be reading too much into this, and it's tough on a webinar, but I actually think the fact that you asked that question means that you can do this. You can dare to ask big. So here's an example of a colleague of mine who was changing jobs, and she had a very similar situation, and she was going to become an executive trainer. And she said, the thing about it is that I'm actually really dynamic in front of people, and they love me, and I follow up with them, and I answer emails, and I answer questions on my cell phone all the time, and I really think that I deserve more than somebody else who's starting, because they kind of do the presentation and then don't offer their extra, this added lagniappe, which is a New Orleans, or I picked that up, of an extra bonus, right? And I said, well, just ask big. And so she said she started to negotiate, and she offered, and she kept negotiating about all sorts of life balance issues. And it was terrific, because she said, I kept coming back, and I saw it as a conversation. And I thought, patience, time is on my side. And it was so interesting, because later when she got the job and she didn't get exactly what she wanted, but she got an improvement on the original offer, which was already good. She said that their response when they sat down as a hiring team was, if she's this good at negotiating for her job, she's going to be great for us, because she is wearing us down. She's also telling the story of how good she is. So remember, you've got to be a storyteller. So yeah, I say go for it. Dare to ask, and ask big.
Oh, I love this one. Okay. I believe we do have a little bit more time for one more question, and this is a really interesting one. One of our attendees is interested to hear what input can be made about negotiating pay as an independent contractor when you have to pay your own taxes, if there are any tips with this kind of negotiation.
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. So we had this come up a lot with women journalists and who were independent contractors, freelance writers, and that is actually where media has moved and other organizations are moving, right? Because you don't have the benefits and pay packages, et cetera. So what I suggested was that they put a dollar amount on exactly what those benefits were, right? So you're going to find out what the health care is, your retirement account, and think creatively, right? So it's not just about your IRA. It's also about long-term disability care, perhaps, short-term disability care, the benefits that we all have to think about because we do live longer. We're going to be living longer than perhaps men we know, and the question is, we're going to have many careers. So you think in terms of quantifying those benefits and then negotiating, because you need that contract. That was the problem, is it right? You're an independent contractor and you need it to put food on your table. But you also need to think of yourself as a storyteller educator, and you need to go to the person you're negotiating with and say, I really want to do this work for you, and this is what it will cost me in the full package. So this is one way you could approach it, is you could say, this project I will do for a reduced amount, but I will do, if you can agree to give me 2 other projects or contracts, 2 other pieces to write, let's assume, I'm just assuming it's a writing piece, and then can you pay the full amount that I require in order to pay my benefits, because I have to pay my own health care and car insurance or whatever it is that you put in that package. Don't forget, you've got overhead, and you've also got to pay for your phone and insurance. So putting all that package together, one way you can say to them is that I will be a loyal and devoted, go over, above and beyond contractor for you. On this package, you'll get this reduced deal, but in the future, can we cut an agreement where there's an ongoing relationship, and I'll be at your disposal, but I really do need to make X amount of dollars. I will note, again, these are tough times for contractors, so if they say, I'm sorry, we can't do that, take the job, and you started the conversation. Take it, do a great job, and then when they come back to you, you say, can we open this collaborative conversation again? I have overhead, I have benefits. You know, again, think of yourself and as a collaborator, but really you're speaking from an authentic voice because you do have those expenses. And we tend to negotiate down in our brains before we ask for what we really need and want. Remember, it's about living, not just existing.
Okay, perfect. Cait, do we have time for a little bit more, or should we wrap up and maybe let them know that we can ask for more, right? Okay.
Let's take 1 or 2 more, and then we'll wrap up, because I know we started a minute or 2 late.
Yes, that's what I was asking. Okay. How many issues is it okay to bring up for consideration during compensation negotiations?
My initial reaction, of course, because I'm a woman who likes to dive into life, is as many as you can. Now, of course, what you do is you've got to have a list. Remember that long pad of paper where you put your most desired outcome? I put a list of must-haves and then categorize those requests, and then, would like to have. Some people have 3 categories where they say, can walk away from, but the point being that if you categorize all those issues, and remember, you're going to walk in saying, I'd like to talk about this compensation package and have a conversation, and this is my opening conversation, because I want to tell you how excited I am, again, being friendly, no gender hostility, I'm not being overly demanding, I'm just having this conversation with you because these are the issues that I really am concerned about. And you don't have to tell the other side what your must-haves are. But what you should do is try to list all those issues to say, I know this is a lot, but these are really things that we should put out here for clear communications. Remember, message sent, message received, that you have thought about this carefully. You're a deliberate person who has done her homework. You're very competent, and you want to make sure that they get the best of who you are. And that's why you're asking all of these things. So it's not confrontational. It's actually conversationalist and saying, there's some things that I can let go. Don't tell them right away what things you'll let go. but can you tell me what your must-haves are? And that way it opens the conversation so that it's a very rich dialogue that lasts over one session. What you don't want to do is what I call these fly-by compensation package negotiations, which was the example that I gave on the phone where I said to the dean of the law school, sure. And I completely lost out. So if I had asked for 17 things, he might have even laughed on the other end of the phone, but I would have said, I know, but I want to make sure that we at least have a candid conversation about all the requests that I can be the best law professor you've ever hired.
Sounds great. Okay, here's one more. I've already been told the max budgeted salary for the position, and they know that my current salary is higher. Knowing their situation, how should I frame asking for more money?
Okay, so if you know that it truly is the max, that's the first question, because whenever I have been in hiring situations, we always have a range, and sometimes you'll hear somebody say, well, that's the highest we can go, and there may be wiggle room of $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000. So the first question is it really the max? And second question is, are there non-cash compensation requests that you can make that actually do have some other cash value so that they could write off? Parking is one that's pretty, for those of us that work in urban centers, it can add up several $100s a month, and the firm can write it off. So I immediately always ask for parking to be paid and my cell phone. Those are things that should help you, I hope. The other is, you could say that when the budget, you can negotiate that you understand that at this time the budget is locked. However, we all know that budgets change and that fiscal situations are evolving. When there is a change in the budget, you negotiate that you will be able to have a 10% or 3% compensation increase. They may not agree to that right away, but if you keep at it by saying, look, I actually am bringing, and then again, it's the storytelling, persuasion. You will persuade them that it's worth giving you this amount and then adding on when things change, and that you will revisit it in 6 months. Sometimes I actually have heard people say that they'll revisit it in 2 months or a month because they may land a big contract. Or, for example, in my field, we write a lot of grants. So in some, now, that also gets into the ethics of grant writing. You can't always write an increase into your salary writing a grant. That's not, there are boundaries there. But if you are landing a big contract or you're going to bring in new customers, then you ask, can I revisit my salary range? And there's no doubt you should put that in writing. And by the way, all of this should be noted in a follow-up email after you've negotiated your compensation package. Thank you so much for this. I'm very excited to work with your firm. This is my understanding. They may do it first, but I'm always one to say send it off as fast as you can just to make sure that there's clarity, and that also continues the conversation.
Perfect. Cait, thank you so much. I think we should wrap up the presentation at this point. There are still so many questions, but I would definitely love to let our attendees know that they can still contact you directly. We will definitely make sure to follow up over email with the recording and your contact information. So if they have any other questions, I assume they can contact you and get some more info. Cait, thanks so much for the great presentation. It was really helpful, and thank you all for attending today. I wish you all the great.
Thank you, Ivy Exec. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye, everybody.